If you've ever had an application that is needed to react to an element being on the screen or an element being overlapped or intersecting with another element on your page, you've probably used scroll events and you've probably or may have pulled in an NPM package to get the functionality you're looking for. If you've used scroll events though, there are some performance issues with that and you do have to do some optimizations to get it to a good spot. What if I told you there's an easier way? The Intersection Observer API. This is part of the web API that is built into your browser, and the Intersection Observer API allows you to do pretty much what the name suggests. You can take two elements and you can observe the intersection between them. So there's a number of different use cases that they have here on the screen. One is lazy loading images or other content as a page is scrolled, implementing infinite scrolling, reporting a visibility of advertisements in order to calculate ad revenue. That's a pretty interesting one. So in this case, you can actually tell when an element is visible or not visible on the screen, and then you can actually use those metrics to drive other functionality. So let's take a look at an application using one. So I have a sample application here, and it's literally just a bunch of images in a big CSS grid. And the grid has, I think, 5,000 items in it. Now, this is just a simple image, but there are some pretty interesting points here. So one thing is, if we go ahead and we look at the image elements, there's two parts here to really worry about. One is there's a data source attribute, which is just a URL. So I'm basically going to show kind of the lazy loading image route. And this is just kind of a quick example of what you can do. So I load my page and I store my URL on the data source. When the element comes into view, I will set the source of the image. So all of the images here that are off my page, you'll see that they just have a data source and they don't have a source attribute. As I scroll down, you'll see them start updating in the element view here. And you could just kind of keep scrolling. And as you scroll, these elements are removed from being observed. So if I go over to the code here, here's my application. I basically just have a quick kind of data generation function here. I'm just importing my image locally. Again, this is just an example. I take this data, I basically put it inside of this scroll container. I grab a reference to it. So, obviously here I'm using React. I'm grabbing a reference to this. And then I'm passing it down to my item component. So if I go to my item component, inside of here, basically I have a reference to my scroll container. The return of this component is literally just a image element. So pretty much everything's in this use effect hook. And the way that this works is it basically creates a new observer. The observer has a callback. You can observe multiple elements. So this is an array. I'm just pulling the first item out here. And then I'm basically looking to see if it's intersecting. Now, if it's intersecting, what I'll do is I'll actually go in and just take the data source attribute, put it on the source attribute. I could put a class on it just to note that it's loaded, and then I just unobserve the element. It's this simple to set up. You don't have to worry about performance out of the box. Everything is in a pretty optimized state for you. So unlike using a scroll event, the input properties here to use the observer, you basically need an element. So this is this could, if it's null or you don't define this, it'll default to your viewport. If you're using the margin feature here, so the margin feature is kind of nice. You can extend the bounds of it. So when it even gets close to being within intersection distance here, the margins will apply. So this is a really nice way to kind of just add some functionality to it. You don't need to include this. And then threshold. This is a pretty interesting one. So for threshold, you can provide it numbers. So you can give different percentages. And basically what this represents is every time you cross one of these thresholds, the event will fire. So the observer callback will fire. So again, this is how you could, measure time, and you could tell when something goes on the screen or off the screen. You can use these thresholds here. For me, I'm setting it as 0, which means that as soon as it just barely intersects, it's going to fire. And then basically my use effect hook, I just disconnect. Overall, the intersection observer offers you a high performant way of observing elements and interactions between elements This is definitely a feature in the web API that I think most people who are doing things with scrolling can make use of today. Again, on the infinite scrolling example, you could unload an element with a lower cost element. You can get memory optimizations in the DOM. There's a lot of different features you can do. And again, the nice thing is with this callback here, on the entry object, we can have access to the bounding rectangle, just lots of different information, the element itself. So you can pretty much do any kind of manipulation you want. The one thing to be careful here, though, is try to avoid setting state in these things, because as it's happening, if it's happening very quickly on a lot of elements, you're really going to impact the rendering performance of your web page. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video on the Interaction Observer. It's definitely useful. Check out the Web API documentation for other useful features.